Once upon a time, back in 1986, which I know for many of you was a very long time ago. Doesn't seem that long ago to me, but for some of you it's a long time ago. There were two ships, and they were in the Black Sea, not far off the coast of Russia. This is back during the, many of you don't even know what the Soviet Union was. We lived in terror of it when I was growing up. But back then, off the coast of Russia, these two ships were coming along, and unfortunately, they had a collision. And when they collided, literally hundreds of people were thrown into the icy water when the ships began to sink, and hundreds of people were killed. It was a terrible, terrible tragedy. But what was worse is when the investigation about what happened took place. Because as they went to figure out what went wrong, they realized there was no technical error. It wasn't a technology problem. The radar systems were working on both ships. That wasn't the problem. The problem was not the bad weather, because it wasn't bad weather. The seas were relatively calm. It was cold, but it wasn't bad. There was no fog. There was no reason that this should have happened. So as they investigated and took a look at the logs and things like this, they realized that it was human error. What had happened was that both captains knew that the other ship was there. They both knew it. But neither one of these captains would steer away. They were just too stubborn. One captain said, "I'm going this way." The other captain said, "I'm coming this way." "You yield." "No, you yield." And they went back and forth, and it became a gigantic game of chicken. And by the time they came to their senses, it was too late. It was too late. Each was too proud to yield first. And because of that, by the time they came to realize they were being stupid, hundreds of people had to pay the price. It's a true story. Now, what I've discovered is that a lot of our personal relationships look a lot like these two ships. A lot of our marriages look like these two ships. A lot of our friendships, our relationships at work, our relationships here in the church, they look like this because when neither party is willing to give up their right to feel offended, when neither party is willing to give up their right to be right. I'm right, and I'm going this direction, and I don't care what anybody says or what anybody does, I am right. And because I'm right, and I won't give up my right to be right, it creates collisions, destruction, damage, division, divorce. Happens all the time. We don't get married because, Melissa, I want to get married because I just can't wait for 10 years from now to get divorced from you. That was not the direction that we set out with our ships, is it? But better than half of our marriages, better than half, end in divorce. Most of us know the pain of what it's like to have a great relationship with somebody, and you think you're going to be friends forever, and now you know you haven't talked to them in years. There's been a collision. There's been division. There's been destruction. And today I want to talk about an incredibly valuable skill. I want to give you something to help you steer your ship away from those kinds of collisions. How many of you want to learn something like that? It's really important, and it's exceptionally difficult to do. Really important and exceptionally difficult to do. See, Jesus said this in Matthew chapter 11, verse 29. He said, "I want you to take my yoke upon you." My yoke means, if you don't know what a yoke is, if you got two oxen or two donkeys and you connect them together with a big piece of wood called a yoke so that both of them are going at the same time. If you don't have the yoke, one's going to run ahead. But a yoke could be really, really heavy. It could be a burden on the animals, or it can be a light yoke. The danger with the light yoke is that they can break it or they can pull ahead. Does that make sense? And what Jesus is saying is he's saying, look, I want you to take my yoke, my teaching on you. Let me teach you. Why? Because I am humble and gentle at heart, and you'll find rest for your souls. In other words, if you follow my teachings, it won't be a burden on you. Instead, you're going to find the rest that you're looking for. You're going to find the solution that you're looking for. But I find it very interesting that when we read this scripture, how many of you find it odd that Jesus says, I am humble, and we believe him? Because most of us go, I don't know about you, but whenever I meet somebody that walks up to me and says, hi, my name is Pat, I'm humble. How many of you believe that? I don't see any hands. Because when somebody tells you that they're humble, you generally go, right, I gotcha. I believe you, sure. But the truth is, when Jesus says, I am humble, we believe him. We absolutely believe him. Why is it? Because when we look at his life as a whole, we buy it, we get it, we understand it. So why is it okay for Jesus to say, I am humble, but not okay for anybody else to say, I am humble? I think the truth of the matter is that we've misunderstood and lost sight of what the word humble means. We don't get it. We don't understand it. Because if we understood it and somebody came up to you and said, well, you know, I've been working on it, I'm very humble. We would not think of them as prideful if we really understood humility. That's what I want to get into today. What is humility? We need to understand that because you see, in our world today, we see humility in a negative way. Most people in the world see somebody that is humble as that weak person that everybody bullies. They see it as the person on the job that has no ambition at all. That's the humble person. And we actually, even though we don't like prideful people, we kind of despise the quote-unquote humble one too, because we all want to get ahead at work. Does that make sense? And so the world has a negative view of what the word humble means. They see it as a person who walks around saying, don't be nice to me. Don't say anything good about me. I don't accept any kind of praise. I don't accept any kind of thank you because I'm humble. That's not humble. That's an idiot. Really, that is. And I use that word idiot on purpose because the Greek word idios means something different than we think of today. I'll get into that in a minute. But a person who's, walking around saying, don't say anything nice to me, I don't accept any kind of praise, is missing the point. Because how many of you know that Jesus accepted praise? In fact, Jesus accepted worship. When Jesus did something good, he wanted everybody to go, yay! Because it was glorifying the Father, correct? He accepted worship. So how can he be humble and yet accept praise and worship? Because again, I don't think we understand the word humble at all. Now I've got your attention because everybody's going, oh, there's a secret here. Yeah, there is. Okay, take a look at it. Colossians chapter 3, verse 12. We've been studying Colossians. We've been going through a chapter and verse. We got up to verse 12 and I hit a snag because it says, therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, clothe yourselves with these things, with compassion, with kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. And we've been going through each one of these words because if it says, if you're going to be God's chosen people, if you're going to be a follower of Jesus, if you're going to take his yoke on you, do this. Clothe yourself. That's intentional. Clothe yourself with these things. But we better know what those things are. And I just proved to you Then we don't have a clue what humility means, and it says to clothe yourself with it. So how many of you know we need to learn it? Make sense? Clothe yourself with humility. All right, well, obviously, the very first thing that we know humility is not is pride, correct? I mean, most of us get the concept that humility is the opposite of pride. It's not pride. But the problem with that is especially in English, there's so many different kinds of pride. I am proud of my 5 children. Is that wrong? No, it's not a bad kind of pride at all. Not at all. I am very proud of the fact that right now, my son is serving the United States by being a part of the Navy out in the Pacific right now. I'm proud of that. I'm not ashamed of that in any way. That's why his picture's out in the front, so that you can send him nice things. I'm proud of my other son who served 4 years in the U.S. Navy. He was honorably discharged. He's a man. He serves his wife. He works hard. I'm proud of him. I'm proud of my daughter who has decided I'm going to serve the Lord. I'm going to serve at this school teaching. She's got a good boyfriend. I like him. This is good for you. I'm proud of my boy because he's a hard worker. He's only in grade 6, and he's already out there working better than some of the other guys that I bring aboard. Need to give you a raise. The truth of the matter is, I'm proud of my daughter. My little girl is the sweetest thing in the world. She's out there going, how can I help this person? How can I help that person? I am proud of my 5 children. There's nothing wrong with that. But there are different kinds of pride. If I say, I'm proud of my 5 children because I have 5 and you only have 3. I'm proud of my 5 children because my kids have got it together and they're serving the Lord and yours are not. You see the difference? There's a difference. You see, bad pride is always competitive. Let me say that again. The bad form of pride is always competitive. I'm not satisfied with what I have. I'm only satisfied that I have more than my rival does. So it's one thing to say, I'm very proud of the fact that I've followed Dave Ramsey's principles. I've done well. I've paid off my debt. I'm working on my emergency fund. Nothing wrong with being proud of that. But if I'm proud that I've got my stuff together and, well, you're a loser. Now I've crossed the line. Do you see the difference? So a bad form of pride is by its very nature always competitive. Now, when we look at relationships, because I started this out by talking about marriages, talking about friendships, talking about interhuman relationships and communication. When I take this concept of what is pride and what is humility and I apply it there, I want you to picture in your mind, and all of us know these people. How many of you know a person who is constantly, always having to be the victim? I mean, they are always the victim. And they're going to tell you and everybody on Facebook about how they're the victim all the time. I can't believe how so-and-so said this now. Or so-and-so did this to me. They're constantly thriving on this drama. Oh, I can't believe you did this. You didn't call me here. You didn't do this. You didn't do that. It's all over Facebook, all over Instagram, all over Twitter. It's in your ear on your cell phone. It's another text and you're going, I cannot stand to hear from so-and-so again. Because it's just one drama after another drama after another drama. You know what that is? This is a person who actually thinks they're humble. That's scary. Because they do. I'm humble after all because everybody stomps on me. Here, rub my ego and tell me it's not true. Do you see it? They think they're humble because they're being downtrodden, they're being mistreated, they're being, whatever. And what they're really doing is they're always competing for attention. You have attention, but it's not enough. It's not as much as I need. You see the competitive nature of it? I need attention. I need somebody to feel sorry for me. I need somebody to stroke my emotional need to be pitied. to be apologized to. You ever been with that person where you get in a conflict with them? And for some reason, you notice that every time you're in a conflict, somehow it always gets around to you saying sorry. And the other person never does. You ever notice that? They'll say something to you. I mean, it hurts your feelings. You say something back. And by the time the conversation's done, they've never once said sorry, but you're groveling on the floor. How did this happen? There are some people that are absolute masters at turning everything around to be all about me. We see relationships like this all the time. There are marriages that fall into this trap. I don't think we intend to start down this path, but I think we get there because it's easy to fall into this trap. Because how many of you know you will be wronged in this life? I flat guarantee it. You will be mistreated. I guarantee it. You will be betrayed and stabbed in the back. Your friends will let you down. I guarantee it. That is legitimate. I'm not saying that you cannot feel hurt. I'm not saying that you cannot feel like somebody has mistreated you. They will mistreat you. Welcome to being human. In fact, Jesus made it very clear. Look, the servant is not above the master. If they insulted me, they had no right to insult Jesus. How many of you know that Jesus never did anything wrong? So there's no right to insult him. But if they insulted him, they're going to insult you. My best friends betrayed me, so I know what that's like, right? One of my friends sold me out to the cross. Are you following me? You see, being hurt, being mistreated, those are legitimate things. It happens to us. But if you allow yourself in your marriage, in your friendships, in your relationships with others, if you allow yourself to constantly take that, however legitimate it is, and constantly twist it around to be all about your emotional needs, you're suffering from a lack of humility. And it's dangerous. Your ship is running this direction, and it's running right into another ship. But you will not give up your right to be offended. You will not give up your right to feel hurt. And because you won't give up that right, that's a lack of humility, and your ship will run into the others. And there will be a collision. There will be a clash. There will be a sinking. Does that make sense? It's important for us to understand this because a lack of humility is so dangerous. When you constantly feel like you're not getting enough attention in your marriage or in your friendships, if you're constantly feeling like you're the one that's being let down all the time, when you refuse to practice humility, it's going to lead to jealousy and envy every time. Whether you're able to identify it or not, it will become, I'm jealous of that person's time. And you will find yourself controlling your kids because they're not giving you enough attention until you literally drive them away because they can't stand how much you're constantly controlling their time because it's all about you. You can do it, mommies. You absolutely can. And fathers, you can do the same thing with your wife. Because she's not giving you enough of this, enough of your time, enough praise, enough respect. So you're constantly clawing at her all the time. You do not practice humility. You will not give up your right to feel offended. And because you won't, your ship is going to clash against hers. And it will be ugly. This is why 50% of our marriages end in divorce. Because we refuse to practice the kind of humility that is willing to give that up. And it becomes jealousy. Then it becomes rage. I mean, when you got married, you didn't go into it with screaming matches between each other. No, before you said I do, things were peachy. That's why you said I do. But after 6 months of, you're never giving me enough, you're never giving me enough, you're never giving me enough, not realizing that that's pride, not realizing that that's a lack of humility. You're constantly feeling let down. And some of it's legit. I just said that, right? Some of it's legitimate. Maybe even most of it's legitimate. But Jesus is saying, I want you to do something completely different. I want you to clothe yourself in humility, and when you do, you'll short-circuit that. If you don't, it becomes rage. Because then when you get into a conflict, it becomes screaming rage. And that pride can lead to envy, jealousy, rage, even murder. Even murder. We watch television shows all the time where fans of those whodunit kind of cop shows. I love those things, go through the mystery, figure out who did it. There's so many of these shows about a jealous woman or a jealous man killing the rival. It's common. It's constant. That's where it leads. So the way to avoid that kind of escalation in your marriage, because all of us get into conflicts, all of us get into fights, all of us get let down. Women, you will feel unloved in your marriage from time to time because your husband's going to let you down. I guarantee it. I'll write a book for you if you need it to prove it. Well, maybe you don't need that proof. How many women out there, you don't need that proof? Don't raise your hand. Don't do that. What's the matter with you? Gotcha. Men, you will feel disrespected. You will feel belittled. Wait a while. Because you're living with a sinner just like you. You're living with a human just like you. So what do we do to avoid these ships crashing into each other? Because we get into these fights, they become escalation, they become rage. The way you do it is you follow this scripture. You decide, I'm going to clothe myself with humility. Now, how do you do that? You clothe yourself every day. And it's an intentional act. You have to go and go, let me pick this, I'm going to do this. I mean, this morning I had to pick out a shirt because it's got to match this, and I don't match things, so my daughter has to pick it for me. But the point is, it's an intentional choice. She picked this. What do you think? Work for it? I mean, Emily picked this. Not Jillian, Emily. It tells you how good I am at matching, huh? I have to ask my 10-year-old to do that? Okay, anyway. That's humility, by the way. So it's something you got to practice. Does that make sense? It's a choice. You got to get up in the morning and say, today I'm going to put on humility. How do you do that? Well, the word humility in the original Greek language, it means it starts with something. It's an attitude, okay? It's an understanding that you own. It's something you walk in all the time. And it begins, this word humility in Greek, it means to get your head around the idea that you are a creature. You're a creature. You're a created being. The idea of your whole existence depends on someone else, on God. That is the beginning of humility. We've got to walk in that concept. In other words, you've got to own the idea that in the grand scheme of things, you're not all that important. Does that make sense? It starts there. In the great big grand scheme of things, you are not all that much. It begins there. It starts there. That's what the word means in Greek. Now, you didn't ask to be born. You did not ask to be born. You did not pick your DNA. You did not order your skills, your talents, your abilities, your desires out of a catalog. You go, well, I think I like this, and I think I'll grab a little bit of that. You didn't have anything to do with it. You owe your existence to someone else. Now, when you think about it that way, it changes things because most of us are really good about complaining about what we did not get. Does that make sense? I didn't get hair, and it's very annoying. But I didn't ask to be born. So if God decided that, on most heads, he's going to put hair, but on perfect heads, he's going to... It's a different way of looking at it, isn't it? I can look at it as, I'm bald. Or I can look at it as, yeah, Right? Right? Humility is a different way of looking at it. I didn't ask for this body. It was picked for me. I live in it because my master allowed me to exist in the first place. Humility begins by understanding that you are absolutely dependent upon God for your whole existence. That means that God, that means that this life, that means that this country, that means that your wife or your husband or your kids, no one owes you anything. That's important to get in your head. Because we live in an entire society, and they're all voting this way. Life owes me because I'm so wonderful. That's a lack of humility. My spouse owes me because, after all, I came into this marriage and gave you me. That's a lack of humility. Your husband doesn't owe you anything. Your wife doesn't owe you anything. This life doesn't owe you anything. This country owes you nothing. Nothing. Because you didn't ask to be born. And you certainly didn't ask to be born in the wealthiest country in the history of the human race and in the 20th century. You didn't ask for that. You are blessed because you could have been born in Haiti, where we're going in December, and I've seen how they live. I've seen their life. We live in these palatial homes, whereas I go down to Haiti and I see people living in a mud hut with a dirt floor, and they've got water filled with cholera and everything else, and we're trying to help them. You could have been born there. You didn't ask to be born, and you certainly didn't ask for all the blessings that you currently have. But we're too busy looking at what we don't have. That's a lack of humility, isn't it? See, humility is understanding that you owe God for absolutely everything. It starts there. Your current life, it starts there. Now, I know there are things that you lack in your life. I know there are, because I have things that I lack in my life. I know that. I know all of us can look at our bank account and, boy, I wish there was more in there. Now, listen, I live with a physical disability. It's painful all the time, every day. Most of you know this because if you come into my office, you see me stand up, sit down, move from 4 different chairs because I can't sit in one place for very long. You know this. I can look at this one of two ways. I can be angry at God that I have to live with so much pain every stinking day. And when my wife I'm on the floor writhing in agony and she's putting her hands on me, I can't do anything other than pray for you until it goes away. I can focus on that. That's easy to do. What I don't have. But God has allowed that in my life. Because I didn't ask to be born. He did not prevent my DNA from creating this problem. I don't know why, but I didn't ask to be born. Humility is going, all right, God, if this is what you have allowed, there's got to be a reason. And you know, the older I get, the more I see it. I hate to say this, but I'm almost thankful for it. I'm getting there. Not quite there. Give me a few more years. But you know what? I look back in my life and I see so many places where because of this disability, I've had to trust God in ways I never would have if I hadn't had it. I see so many places in the last 49 years where I've had to cry out to God, where my relationship with God is deeper, richer, fuller, and more real because I've had to live with this pain than it would have been otherwise. And my master has promised me, you put up with what I put in your life, you put up with it with a humble attitude in the right way, and I'll reward the socks off of you because I'm going to give you a body that works. Because when you check out of this life, because you put your trust in me, you'll have a brand new spine and it'll be perfect. And it'll never hurt again, ever. There will be days in heaven, I imagine, where I'm going to say, I remember. But boy, I got this. Praise the Lord. That day will come. I look forward to it. But in the meantime, I learned something. I'm out the other day, I'm walking, talking to the boss. And I'm looking up and I'm going, thank God I've got a nervous system that can appreciate how beautiful today is. Because you could have created me in such a way that I would miss that sunset, that I would miss wow, that's beautiful. So between this back spasm and this back spasm, I'm going to enjoy life. Does that make sense? Humility is going, you know what? Instead of complaining and moaning and groaning about what I don't have, I'm going to focus on what God has given me. I'm going to start looking at, well, God, you've allowed this in my life. There's got to be a purpose. I trust you. That's what humility is. It's a completely different attitude. Now, I've got to expose myself in front of you in order to teach you, but it's important that we go through this stuff because I had to ask a deeper question. Think about this for a second. When I was going through, why did I have to wear a back brace from here to here all the way through my teenage years and deal with everybody calling me a cyborg and all of the bullies and all of the problems, and it didn't really solve the problem because I'm just as much pain today as I was when I was 14, so why? And after a while, I began to ask a different question. Why is there anything at all? I mean, let's think about that question. Why is there something in this universe and not nothing? Answer it. There is no answer unless you understand this incredible concept. There is something in the universe, and that means somebody had to think it all up. You know why that's true? Because the laws of logic tell me that nothing could never produce anything. Does that make sense? Nothing can't produce anything. Nothing produces nothing, and that's all that nothing ever could. Nothing produces nothing. But the universe is loaded with something. Lots of somethings. You're a something. The chair you're sitting on is a something. Where did it come from? And when you think about that logically, when you follow it back, you have to ask a very deep question. See, when you look out at science, there are two major laws in science, the first and second laws of thermodynamics. The first law of thermodynamics says that all of the energy in the universe is a constant. There's only so much energy in the universe. That is the most proven law in all of science. There's only so much energy. It's not just, there's no new energy just popping into existence out of nothing because nothing cannot produce anything. Does that make sense? In fact, there's some scientists that try to postulate that there's just, new hydrogen atoms just spontaneously popping into existence all the time because they don't like the idea that there's a God. But that's never been observed scientifically. What we know scientifically is there's only so much energy. The second law of thermodynamics says that every time you use energy, some of it will be lost. We burn these lights. It's using energy. Some of it is lost. It's lost as heat. And when it's lost, it can never be used again. Now, the implications of the second law say that the entire universe is winding down. There's only so much energy, and every time you use it, you lose some, and it can never be recovered. That means the universe is not eternal. That is a scientific fact. It had a beginning, and according to even the world's greatest physicists that don't believe in God, they know that the entire universe came from nothing. But nothing cannot produce anything. That means, scientifically speaking, that there must be something, or better, someone who is eternal. There must be a cause that has no beginning. Why? Because since nothing cannot produce anything, but everything that has a beginning must have a cause, then there must be a cause that has no cause. Something that's eternal. You can't have an infinite regress. You have to have a beginning. And that beginning must be eternal. Cannot have a cause. We call it the uncaused first cause. That's who God is. So logically speaking, scientifically speaking, there is a God. He thought up the entire universe. He is eternal, which means he is outside of time. And because he is outside of time, when you understand that, you begin to see that you having an existence at all is an insane miracle. Does that make sense? God thought you up from all eternity, long ago, before the first moment, before the Big Bang. God knew every day of your life. God knew everything you were going to suffer. Everything. God knew the stresses that you would go through. God knew the uncertainty that you're facing. God knew it all, and He allowed it. Humility is going, okay, you're way bigger and smarter than me. And if you've allowed this, I'm going to trust you. I'm going to trust you to get me through it. I'm going to trust you. God has allowed your life. Now, there are so many times we don't like our circumstances, but that does not mean that God owes you anything. And when you think about that, it should make you incredibly grateful. That's the beginning of humility. See, with the back problem that I face, if all I do is face the pain and the problem and how unfair it is, I'm forgetting that God is the one that runs the universe, and God is the one that said, I'm going to allow this in your life, and God is the one that said, I promise you that if you put your trust in me, I'll give you a new body in the end, so quit whining about it because I have a purpose for it. Humility is understanding that. And I begin to say, thank God for what? Well, how about Josiah and Jimmy and Nathan and Jillian and Emily? How about starting there? How about thank you for Melissa? How about thank you for this church? How about thank you, Lord, that I have a nervous system that can understand how beautiful that sunset is. Thank you for this. Thank you for this. Thank you for this. Thank you for this. And that drives away my complaints. Because we all have them. See, if you get in a marriage and all you do is complain about this in her and that in her and this in her and that in her, instead of saying, thank God that she's in my life at all. Thank God that He put us together. Thank God that we have, you see the difference? Humility is going, whoa, wait a second. You allowed me to have a spouse in the first place. There's a whole lot of single people out there that wish they were married. You see the difference? Humility is all about your attitude, and it starts with who runs this universe, you or Him? Say Him. Say it again. Okay. Now, when you think about this, that's the beginning of humility. You know, Teddy Roosevelt put it this way. He would go out camping with people. He'd take his visitors outside when he was camping. And he would point to a star cluster. And he would say, you know, that's the spiral galaxy of Andromeda. And it's as large as our Milky Way. It has 100 million galaxies. It consists of over 100 billion suns, and all of them are bigger than our sun. And then you let that sink in for a minute. And then he'd look at his friends and he'd go, well, now I think we're all small enough. Let's go to bed. Humility. You know, Jesus taught it this way. Back in Mark chapter 9, verse 33, it says they were walking along, they came to Capernaum, and when he came into the house, he said, what are you guys arguing about out on the road? Do you think, how many of you knew that Jesus knew what they were arguing about? But he asks us these questions to get us thinking. But of course, they kept quiet because on the way, they'd been arguing about who was the greatest. I deserve this much attention because I'm so wonderful, said Pete. Sitting down, Jesus called the 12. He said, all right, if anyone wants to be first, he must be the very last and the servant of all. He's teaching here. What's he saying? I want you to notice something. He says, if anyone wants to be first. See, one of the first things we need to understand about humility is it doesn't mean you can't want to improve yourself. He didn't reprove them for wanting to be first. Do you see that? There's nothing wrong with having ambition. There's nothing wrong with wanting to succeed. There's nothing wrong with wanting to do well. There's nothing wrong with looking at your finances and saying, I'm going to fix this. I'm going to follow these principles and I'm going to change my life. There's nothing wrong with wanting success or ambition. None of those things. You want to be first? That's okay. Let me show you how to do it, is what Jesus is saying. Let me show you how to do it. Now, in the original language, the word servant here means one who voluntarily sacrifices themselves for the needs of other people. See, there's another word in Greek he could have used, which means slave. A slave has no choice but to sacrifice themselves for the needs of others, right? But he didn't use that word. He used the word that means servant. That's a person who voluntarily sacrifices themselves for the needs of others. And he's saying, that's the key. That's the path to true distinction and true greatness is when you learn the humility of self-sacrifice for other people. That's why we admire heroes, because they're willing to sacrifice their lives for others. Now, as we go through this, I made the point painfully clear that you're a creature and you didn't ask to be born. I made the point painfully clear that if you want to be great, if you want to be, if you want your marriage to succeed, if you want your finances to succeed, if you want your parenting to succeed, you've got to learn this concept of humility. But how in the world do you apply it? Because it all sounds great, but how do you use it? How do I make it practical? Let's take a look. John 13:34 says, "A new command that I give you, love one another as I have loved you, so you must love one another. And by this, all men will know that you're my disciples if you love one another." Listen, more than half of our marriages are ending in divorce because we don't know how to love one another. We don't understand that concept because the whole world says, be true to yourself. Be true to your feelings. Isn't that right? I mean, every movie you watch, every show you watch, be true to your own feelings. Don't deny your feelings, but instead act on those feelings. And when you put your feelings first, you're going to make happiness. No, you're not. That's a lack of humility. It's loaded with pride. You're going to end up all by yourself. Your ship is going this way, and it's saying, hold on to your feelings. Hold on to your right to be offended. Hold on to your right because you've been insulted. Hold on to your feelings and what's good for you. Okay, keep going that way. You're going to run into every other ship in this ocean, aren't you? That's what the world says to do. Jesus says, do exactly the opposite. Jesus says, do exactly the opposite. Sacrifice yourself. Turn your ship. Now, what does he mean by that? Take a look at 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 9. Finally, all of you, live in harmony with one another. Be sympathetic. Love as brothers, be compassionate, and here's the word again, and humble. Do not repay evil with evil or insult with insult, but with blessing, because to this you were called. Why? So that you may inherit a real blessing. You see, when you're willing, your ship is going this way, and somebody has insulted you, and you're willing to turn your ship and not return the insult, you will inherit a blessing of missing the collision. You see that? It's right there. For whoever would love life and see good days must keep his, what is it? Tongue. Because that's where all this escalation and rage and all of this stuff is coming from. Keep your lips from deceitful speech. So humility is sacrificing your right to be offended, and you do that for the good of other people. It means not repaying evil with evil. It means not repaying insult with insult. Now, when you're in a marriage and you're in that relationship, there will be days when your husband, when your wife is having a bad day. They're feeling, unloved or disrespected or whatever it happens to be, and they're going to say something and it's just plain insulting. It's wrong. But humility is, I'm going to take that. I'm going to take it right on the chin. Why? Because Matthew chapter 5, verse 39 says this, I tell you, do not resist an evil person. Your spouse is not evil. You may think so, but they're not. And if someone strikes you in the right cheek, let him hit the other one also. Do you see that? Humility is that deliberate choice not to escalate this. You have insulted me. It's legit, but they insulted Jesus too. What did Jesus do? He didn't say anything. Do you remember that part? I know how hard that is. Because when something is said to me and it hurts, all I want to do is come back and say the same kind of things backwards or defend myself or whatever it happens to be. I got my ship going this way. You got your ship going this way. I've been offended and I have a right to be offended because I know what you just said is 100% wrong. Listen, humility is not saying it's okay. It's not okay. What humility is, I'm going to hold my tongue in check. I'm going to sacrifice my right to feel and be offended and insulted in order to keep these ships from colliding. I'm going to let you slap me right on this cheek. And it's going to hurt. And I may have to go, So what you're saying is you really hate me today. And you think I'm the world's worst excuse for a pastor. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. You did this and you insulted me and you did that and you did this. And I know it's not true. And it hurts to hear it. And I don't like it. But I'm not going to return the evil with evil. I'm not going to return the insult with another insult. I'm not going to do that. Why? Because humility is an intentional choice to go, I'm not going to let these ships collide. Humility is going, all right, I'm going to let you have your moment. And I'm going to turn my ship this way. Now, I'm not saying that you should be a doormat. I never said that. But humility is that deliberate choice to take control of your tongue and not escalate something. And guess what? It's a sacrifice. It's a serious, serious sacrifice. But if you think about it for a second, Jesus was offended by your whole life. How many of you know that you have said things that make God cringe? Anybody? Anybody humble enough to admit that? How many of you know you have thought things that have made God so disgusted he wanted to barf? Yeah? Any of you? Or am I the only one that's done that? How many of you know that God has seen how you treated your husband, seen how you treated your wife, seen how you treated your friends, seen these things, and he is offended, and he's willing to sacrifice his right to be offended all the way to the point of taking your punishment on a cross. And he says, learn from me. I am humble. I'm willing to sacrifice my right to be offended for you. You need to do the same. That's what's going to create peace and harmony in your marriage, guys. Because if both of you are doing it, you're both going out of your way not to run into each other. Isn't that beautiful? Even if one is still plowing forward, you don't want to get around it. Humility is awesome and really hard to do.